For years, I kept a spreadsheet open on my second monitor. And every time a client sat across from me asking about Social Security, I'd run the numbers and say the same thing. Wait until 70. The math is clear. I was right about the math. I was wrong about almost everything else. Because here's what that spreadsheet didn't capture. It didn't know that my client was waking up at 5 a.m. for a job that had stopped meaning anything to him around 2019. It didn't account for the back that ached by Wednesday, or the fact that his mother had died at 71 and his father at 74. It didn't factor in his daughter's kids, the ones he was watching grow up through a phone screen, because he was still technically employed. The spreadsheet just showed two numbers, smaller now, bigger later. I've watched this happen more times than I can count. Smart, hard-working people in their early 60s. People who have done everything right, still grinding through jobs that are slowly taking something from them. Not because they love the work, because somewhere along the way they got convinced that claiming Social Security at 62 is a financial mistake, that it's the math of someone who didn't plan well enough. That framing is costing people years. If you're in your late 50s or early 60s, you've probably heard the standard advice, delay, delay, delay. Wait for the bigger check. Let it grow. The optimal age is 70. And that advice isn't wrong exactly. It's just incomplete. It assumes you'll be equally healthy at 82 as you are at 62. It assumes the money you'd receive at 62 has no value sitting in your hands. And it completely ignores two specific traps that have absolutely nothing to do with the size of your monthly check. So before we get into strategy, I want to put the wait until 70 argument to a real test. Not to dismiss it, but to find out what it actually costs and what it's actually protecting you from. Because the real barriers to claiming at 62 are not what the spreadsheets say they are. Let's start with the calculation everyone uses to justify waiting. If you claim at 62, your monthly benefit gets permanently reduced, roughly 30% less than your full retirement age amount. Claim at 70, and you get 24% more than that. So the conventional wisdom says, wait as long as you can collect the bigger check and eventually you'll come out ahead. The number people throw around is the break-even point. The idea is simple at some age. The accumulated total you received by claiming early gets overtaken by the higher payments from waiting. Most calculators put that crossover somewhere around age 78 to 80. So if you live past 80, waiting wins. Simple enough. Except that math is wrong. Not wrong in its arithmetic. Wrong in what it's measuring. It's counting dollars like they're all worth the same. A dollar you receive at 62 and a dollar you receive at 82 are treated as identical. But anyone who's ever thought about investing knows that's not how money works. This is where net present value comes in. It sounds technical. It's not. It just means a dollar in your hand today is worth more than a dollar promised to you in 20 years because today's dollar can grow. So when you run the numbers with a realistic rate of return, say 4% to 6%, which is conservative for a balanced portfolio, the picture shifts dramatically. At a 4% discount rate, the real break-even age for delaying to 70 gets pushed out to roughly 86. At 6%, you're looking at closer to 90 to 95. Think about what that means. According to the Social Security Administration's own data, a man reaching 62 today has roughly a 50% chance of living to 85. A woman, about 50% to 88. So statistically, you are essentially flipping a coin on whether waiting will ever mathematically pay off. And that's before accounting for health, family history, or the quality of those extra years. Here's the mechanism behind why this matters. When you claim Social Security at 62, you can leave your 401k or investment portfolio untouched. Those assets keep compounding. You're not withdrawing from them to cover living expenses. That's real money doing real work for 8 more years. The person who waits until 70 often has to pull from savings during those same 8 years to survive. which means they're drawing down a portfolio that should have been growing. The bigger check at 70 has to compensate for 8 years of missed compounding on whatever they pulled out. That's a hill that's much steeper than the standard break-even chart admits. And with the 2026 KOH adjustment sitting at 2.8%, there's another dimension worth noting. Inflation is still doing its work. Having money in your hands earlier, money you can deploy into assets that outpace inflation, matters more in this environment than it did in a zero-rate world. I want to be direct about the trade-off because I think most financial advice dances around it. If you delay to 70, you're optimizing for your 80s and 90s, the decades when most people describe themselves as in no-go years. Less travel, more medical appointments, fewer things they want to spend money on. You're sacrificing the years between 62 and 70, the years most people call their go-go years, the ones with the most physical capacity, the most curiosity, the most ability to actually use money. That's not a spreadsheet problem. That's a life design problem. Claiming early isn't the math of someone who gave up. It's the math of someone who decided that time in their 60s is worth more than a larger deposit in their 80s. And depending on your portfolio return, your health, and your family history, the numbers may actually agree with you. The math can protect this decision. The standard advice just hasn't been running the right calculation. But here's what I've watched trip people up, even after they've made peace with the numbers. It's not the size of the Social Security check. It's a different line item entirely, one that doesn't show up anywhere on the Social Security Administration's website. It's the bill that arrives 30 days after you stop working. So you've done the NPV math, you've made peace with the 30% reduction, you're ready, and then someone asks, what are you doing about health insurance? That question has stopped more early retirements than any spreadsheet ever did. Here's the structural problem. You can file for Social Security the month you turn 62, but Medicare doesn't start until you turn 65. That's a 3-year window where you are, effectively, on your own for health coverage. No employer plan, no Medicare, just you and the private insurance market. For most people, that gap doesn't feel real until they actually price it out. I've been close to this moment with more clients than I'd like to admit. One in particular comes to mind. She was 62, had spent over 2 decades at the same company, and finally submitted her retirement paperwork. Her Social Security check came in at $1,800 a month. Not lavish, but workable. That was the plan. 30 days later, the COBRA notice arrived. For anyone who hasn't seen one, COBRA is the federal program that lets you keep your employer's health insurance after you leave a job. The catch is that you now pay the full premium, what you paid before, plus what your employer was covering on your behalf, plus a small administrative fee. Her bill was $1,240 a month. For one person, she sat there doing the math in real time. $1,800 coming in, $1,240 going straight back out. That left $560 a month to cover rent, food, utilities, and everything else. The retirement she had spent years planning had just been reduced in one envelope to a cash flow crisis. This is the Medicare Gap, and it's not a fringe scenario. It's the default outcome for anyone who retires before 65 without a plan for this specific line item. COBRA is one option, but it is rarely the right one. It's expensive, and it only lasts 18 months, which still leaves you 18 months short of Medicare eligibility. The option most people overlook is the ACA marketplace. The Affordable Care Act was specifically designed for situations like this, and the subsidy structure is more generous than most people realize. Your subsidy is calculated based on your projected income for the year, not your past salary. This is where early retirement planning becomes genuinely strategic. If you structure your income carefully in those 3 years, keeping your combined household income in the right range relative to the federal poverty level, You may qualify for substantial premium subsidies that bring your monthly costs down to something manageable. In some cases, dramatically so. The numbers shift every year, but the mechanism stays the same. The less taxable income you show, the larger the subsidy. And in early retirement, you have more control over your taxable income than you think. Social Security benefits are only partially taxable. Roth withdrawals don't count as income. A modest part-time income, kept below certain thresholds, can be structured to keep you in a favorable subsidy range. The trade-off, if you ignore this entirely, is severe. You either pay full private market rates out of pocket, which can run $800 to $1,500 a month, or more depending on your state and age. Or you go uninsured for 3 years, which is a financial risk that can erase decades of savings in a single hospitalization. But if you do the work in advance, model your income, check healthcare.gov, understand what your subsidy-eligible range looks like, those 3 years become navigable. Uncomfortable maybe, but not catastrophic. The Medicare Gap is real. It's the most common reason I've seen people abandon a retirement plan that was otherwise sound. Not because the math was wrong, because they didn't price out the insurance before they handed in their badge. Now here's where it gets more complicated. Because some people look at that $560 left over and think, I'll just pick up a part-time job to cover the gap. Reasonable instinct. Completely logical, and it walks them straight into the second trap. Remember the client from the last section. The one staring at $560 a month after the COBRA bill. She did what most people would do. She called a former colleague, picked up a part-time consulting contract, and started bringing in around $2,500 a month. Enough to cover the insurance gap and have something left over. It felt like a solution. 4 months later, a letter arrived from the Social Security Administration. It wasn't a check. It was a notice. Her benefits were being suspended. This is the earnings limit, and it is one of the most misunderstood rules in the entire Social Security system. Here's how it works. If you claim Social Security before your full retirement age, which for most of Gen X is 67, and you continue to earn income from work, the government puts a cap on how much you can make before they start clawing back your benefits. In 2026, that limit is $22,320 a year, just under $1,860 a month. For every $2 you earn above that threshold, Social Security withholds $1 of your benefit. It doesn't taper gently. It hits a number and starts pulling. So walk through the math on her situation. She's earning $2,500 a month in consulting income. That's $30,000 a year. $7,680 over the 2026 limit. The ESSA withholds $1 for every $2 over, so they hold back $3,840 for the year. Spread across 12 months, that's $320 less per month in benefits. Her $1,800 check just became $1,480. The consulting income helped. The withholding clawed some of it back, and she still had the $1,240 insurance bill. Now she's working part-time, managing client relationships, invoicing, dealing with self-employment tax, and her net position has barely moved. I want to be precise about one thing, because I've seen people get this wrong in both directions. The withheld money is not gone permanently. Once you reach your full retirement age, the SA recalculates your benefit to credit you back for the months they withheld. Your monthly check goes up slightly to reflect it. So over a long enough timeline, you do recover some of it. But that future credit does nothing for your cash flow right now. And if you're in early retirement specifically because you needed the breathing room, financially and physically, a surprise benefit suspension in month 4 is not an abstract future problem. It's a present crisis. I don't have a crystal ball on what Congress might do to Social Security's structure in the next decade. But I can tell you with certainty that this rule is active right now, in 2026, and it will grind through a cash flow plan that wasn't built around it. The people who navigate this well aren't smarter. They just know the number before they start. If you plan to do any paid work after claiming at 62, consulting, freelancing, part-time retail, seasonal work, anything that generates a W-2 or self-employment income, the strategic ceiling for 2026 is $22,320 for the full year. That's the line you build around. Some people can stay comfortably under it. A few hours a week of something low-key, kept deliberate. Others find that any meaningful work pushes them past it fast, which changes the calculus on whether claiming early makes sense at all, or whether waiting until FRA to claim and then working freely is the cleaner path. There's also a separate rule for the calendar year you actually reach your full retirement age. In that year, the limit jumps significantly. In 2026, it rises to $59,520 for the months before your birthday, and then disappears entirely once you cross that line. After FRA, you can earn any amount without any benefit reduction. The limit is a pre-FRA problem only. The stress test scenario here is the one that keeps me up at night on behalf of clients. Someone claims early, gets hit with the Medicare Gap, tries to patch it with part-time work, trips the earnings limit, loses a chunk of their benefit, and then, to cover the shortfall, starts pulling from their investment portfolio at exactly the wrong moment. Maybe the market is down. Maybe they're selling at a loss. That sequence can do real damage. Not because any one decision was catastrophic, but because three manageable problems compounded into each other before anyone saw it coming. The person who understands the earnings limit in advance keeps their part-time income deliberate and controlled. They treat $22,320 as a hard ceiling, not a soft guideline. They design the work around the number, not the other way around. Once the health coverage is handled and the income is structured, there's one more layer most people miss entirely. And it doesn't just affect you. It affects your spouse. Most people treat Social Security as a personal decision. What's my benefit? What's my break even? When should I file? That framing works if you're single. If you're married, it's the wrong unit of analysis. The decision belongs to the household. And when you start running it that way, some combinations that look like sacrifices on paper turn out to be the most financially sound moves a couple can make. Here's the setup I've seen work well more than once. A couple in their early 60s. One spouse, let's say the husband, has the higher earnings record. His projected benefit at 70 would be significantly larger than anything she'd collect on her own record. She worked, contributed, but her career had lower W-2 income across the decades. Her benefit at 62 comes in around $1,100 a month. On its own, $1,100 looks modest. Maybe not worth the 30% early claim reduction. That's the instinct most people have. But here's what that $1,100 actually does for the household. It covers the recurring baseline. Utilities, groceries, insurance premiums, one car payment. Not everything, but enough that the household is no longer burning through savings just to keep the lights on. That changes everything for him. Because now he doesn't have to file. He can keep working, or stop working, and simply wait, while his benefit grows at 8% per year from his full retirement age to 70. That's a guaranteed 8% annual return on a government-backed asset in a period when most fixed income is paying a fraction of that. The portfolio stays intact. The 401k keeps compounding. Nothing has to be liquidated to cover February's electric bill. She accepted a smaller check, but she bought him time. And time, in this context, is worth a specific dollar amount. Run the rough numbers. If his benefit at 67 would be $3,200 a month, Waiting to 70 gets him to roughly $3,968. That's an additional $768 a month for life. Over 20 years of retirement, that difference compounds into real money. And more importantly, it becomes the foundation for what happens after he's gone. This is where survivor benefits come in, and most couples don't think about this until it's too late to optimize for it. When the higher earning spouse dies first, and statistically, in opposite sex couples, the husband often does, the surviving spouse steps into his benefit. Not a portion of it, the full amount. Whatever he was collecting at the time of his death becomes her monthly income for the rest of her life. If he claimed at 62, she inherits a reduced benefit. If he waited to 70, she inherits the maximized one. This is the asymmetry that changes the household math entirely. She accepting a modest benefit early isn't a sacrifice. It's the mechanism that allows him to build the largest possible financial shield for her later. The income bridge she provides in her 60s funds his ability to create her security in her 80s. I've watched this framing land differently for couples than the standard maximize your own check advice. Because it reframes the early claim not as a concession, not as settling for less, but as a deliberate, strategic move that the household made together. She's not the lower earner who had to claim early because the math didn't work out. She's the one who ran the bridge so the household could build something bigger on the other end. There's one more layer worth naming. Spousal benefits are separate from survivor benefits and carry their own rules. If her own earned benefit is lower than 50% of his full retirement age amount, she may be eligible to collect a spousal top-up once he files. That calculation is worth running with an advisor because the sequencing of who files when affects what she can claim and when. The household that understands these three levers, her early bridge, his delayed maximum, and the survivor protection it creates, has a fundamentally different retirement picture than the one where each spouse just optimizes individually. You're not two separate spreadsheets. You're one balance sheet. At this point, you have the full framework. The NPV math, the Medicare Gap, the earnings limit, the household strategy. What's left is the shortest part, and probably the most useful. What do you actually do next? You don't need a new framework at this point. You need three specific things to do. The first is to rerun the break-even math the right way. Most online Social Security calculators add up total lifetime payments and find the crossover point. That's not the calculation you want. Ask a financial advisor or use a tool that allows you to input a discount rate and run the NPV version. Plug in 4%, then 6%, and see where your personal break-even age lands. If it's past 86, that changes how you think about the decision. If your family history doesn't support living that long in good health, that changes it further. The second is to price out the Medicare Gap before you do anything else. Go to healthcare.gov and run a quote based on your projected retirement income, not your current salary. The subsidy calculation is income-based, and in early retirement, your taxable income may be lower than you think. Model what you'd actually owe at different income levels. The number you find may be a problem. It may also be far more manageable than you expected. Either way, you need to know it before you file, not after. The third is to set a hard ceiling on part-time income. If you plan to do any paid work after claiming at 62, the 2026 earnings limit is $22,320 for the full year. Build your work around that number. If the work you're considering would push you past it, run the math on what the withholding actually costs you in real cash flow, and decide whether the income is still worth it, or whether a different approach makes more sense. 3 numbers. 3 checks. Do them in order. Claiming Social Security at 62 is not a math failure. It is a decision to buy back time during the years when you can still use it. When your back holds, when your energy is there, when the people you want to spend time with are still around to spend it with. The standard advice treats delay as discipline and early claiming as impatience. That framing ignores what the NPV math actually shows, what the Medicare Gap actually costs, and what the earnings limit actually does to a cash flow plan that wasn't built around it. None of these are reasons to avoid claiming early. They're reasons to prepare for it correctly. I've seen people do this well, not because they were wealthier or luckier, but because they ran the right numbers before they made the call, and they understood the system they were stepping into. That's what this channel is for. If you're still working through the Medicare Gap question, how to structure those 3 years between 62 and 65 without getting crushed by insurance costs, drop it in the comments. I read them, and that topic alone is worth a dedicated breakdown. And if this kind of thinking is useful to you, subscribe to Wes Investor. We'll keep going.